That is not who's doing our presentation. Slava Isusu Christu.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? We're a little bit early here. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? We're a little bit early for him, so this is probably why there's a... Oh, can you hear us?
Jesus Christ, I can hear you. I'm sorry that it took me so long. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay, just 1 second, because now I have to get this onto Facebook.
No problem. I'm going to get a glass of water.
Sounds good. Of hands, who was able to view last night's seminar?
You're really weak, Father Jay.
My internet connection is, didn't eat my veggies today. You're coming in nice and strong.
I'm coming in strong. Okay, that's good. Just as long as you can hear me, that's okay. I'm going to say hi to all the people in Oakburn, by the way. Looks like you have a beautiful church.
It's a classic Philip Ruse, so.
Oh, wonderful. The cathedral here in Saskatoon is built by Father Philip Rue.
Okay. So I'm actually going to move you, Cyril.
Sounds good. Hello to everyone on Facebook.
So you can see a little bit more of us, a little higher up. We can thank Russell for the loaning of this wonderful mic. It worked really well yesterday, so we're going to use it again today.
God bless the people in Russell. Okay. And you can hear me clearly.
You are nice and loud right now.
Great. Hopefully not too loud.
Is that good? Okay. Let me grab my mic. All right, for those of you joining us online, I'm praying that this is working right now. Everyone, this is the world-renowned Father Deacon Cyril Kennedy, who comes to us live from Saskatoon. Since no one really saw this yesterday, a quick little introduction. He and I go back many, many years. He studied in Ottawa at the seminary before I got there. And so he kind of finished and then I arrived. But he was still studying in Ottawa at St. Paul University around the same time. So we did overlap in Ottawa. And in fact, because Sophia was there before I was there too. So we do go back. He is from the wonderful parish of St. Elias in Brampton, Ontario. He was born and raised there. And his dad is actually the deacon at St. Elias as well, currently right now. And he, even though he's in Saskatoon and he's from Ontario, he belongs to neither of those eparchies. He is actually a deacon for the Edmonton Eparchy. So he is currently not there because he is, well, he's supposed to be in Washington, D.C., studying at the Catholic University there. However, due to COVID and at the time, the expectant delivery of his second child, he and his wife and his other daughter decided to move back to Canada to finish his degree while in Saskatoon, where his wife Anna is from. So they are there currently with their family, with her family. So he's doing his studies long distance, like most university students at this point in life. We're doing them distance and stuff like that. So he is supposed to be in Washington, but he's currently residing and studying in Saskatoon. And while he's there, he's been helping out the parishes there, in particular the cathedral in Saskatoon of St. George's, where he not only served, but he has a beautiful voice. So he has been, I think, cantering more often than not, in fact. So, other than that, I will let him kind of explain more and continue his talk. And Father Cyril, I don't know if you heard, but most of these people did not actually, in fact, hear your first presentation yesterday yet. So maybe if you have a chance to kind of just recap a couple minutes, a little bit about yesterday's, if it's pertinent to continuing on today.
For sure.
Father Deacon Cyril.
Thank you, Father Jay. And I want to thank you for welcoming me virtually into your church. I hope someday to visit it in person. It's a shame that because of COVID, we can't be physically together, which is really how Christians should be. We really need to be praying in the same spaces. But I thank God that at least some of you can be together, and that I can communicate with you over these means. So very briefly, yesterday I talked about a miracle that Jesus worked, the miracle where he casts out a demon from a man who lives among the tombs. It's the famous gospel of the pigs, where a man who's possessed by a demon meets Jesus as Jesus is coming to this man's country. And the man is a Gentile. He's probably an idol worshiper. He is in so many ways symbolic of how we are alienated from God. And Jesus invades this man's space. He kicks down the door on this man's alienation from God. He drives the demons that inhabit this man into the pigs and then into the sea as a symbol of our baptism. And then he reconciles this man to himself, to God, and to his neighbor. And that's really the focus of my talk. And now I'm going to begin today. I'm going to set my timer. The focus of my talk yesterday was on the grace of God, how God moves towards us in his great love, his compassion, his mercy, how he takes the initiative in his relationship with us. He doesn't wait for us to show him that we're worthy. He takes the initiative. We see this in parables like the prodigal son. When the prodigal son comes to his senses and journeys home to his father, he rehearses a speech as he goes home. Father, I've sinned against God and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Let me be like one of your servants in your house. But when the son gets to his father, the father doesn't let him finish what he's saying. The son is halfway through his speech, and the father is already calling to his servants. He's embracing his son, and he's calling to his servants, saying, prepare a feast, because my son was dead and now he's alive. We also see this great initiative of God, his great mercy, his grace. Perhaps more than anywhere else, we see it with the thief on the cross. The thief has no claim on God. He is justly condemned. He's actually a robber, and perhaps much worse. A robber in the ancient Roman world is possibly somebody who's also a murderer, possibly also a rapist. This guy really has no claim to righteousness at all. He's justly condemned, and he turns to Jesus on the cross and says, remember me, Lord, when you come into your kingdom. And that alone is enough. God reconciles this thief to himself, according to his initiative. So that's actually, and that's a big theme of all 3 days, is the grace of God, how God moves towards us. But today and tomorrow, we're going to look at 2 more gospel passages that show the grace of God in action. But today and tomorrow, I don't just want to look at the grace of God. I want to look at the response that the grace of God presumes in us. Because God's energy, his love, doesn't just reconcile us with God. It actually changes us so that we can be conformed to his love. So without much ado, I'm going to begin the passage. I'm going to read to you the passage. This is from Mark chapter 5. Jesus was walking, and a large crowd followed him. They were pressing all around him. Now there was a woman who had suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years. After long and painful treatment under various doctors, she had spent all she had without being any the better for it. In fact, she was getting worse. She had heard about Jesus, and she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his cloak. If I can touch even his clothes, she had told herself, I shall be well again. And the source of the bleeding dried up instantly, and she felt in herself that she was cured of her complaint. Immediately, aware that power had gone out from him, Jesus turned round in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? His disciples said to him, You see how the crowd is pressing round you, and yet you say, Who touched me? But he continued to look all round to see who had done it. Then the woman came forward, frightened and trembling, because she knew what had happened to her, and she fell at his feet and told him the whole truth. My daughter, he said, your faith has restored you to health. Go in peace and be free from your complaint. So today I want to walk through 3 things. I want to walk through the problem that this woman has. I want to walk through the solution that Jesus gives her. And then I want to walk through what that means for us, how that has an impact on our lives. So the woman's problem. Let's look at the scene. Number 1, there's a crowd. There's a bunch of people around Jesus. It's as if Jesus has an obstacle course around him. It's as if he has a barrier of humans around him. And then we meet this woman who for 12 years has suffered a hemorrhage. She's bleeding constantly. It never goes away. She's in terrible pain. And the gospel says she suffered much from many physicians. So she's gone to the doctors and the doctors can't help her. They actually have made her situation worse. She's beyond human help. She has spent all she has, all her money. So this is 2,000 years ago. There's no Medicare in ancient Rome. So if you have money to spend on medicine, you're probably fairly well off. So this woman had money to spend on doctors. And for 12 years, she spent all her money on doctors. And not only has she not gotten better, actually, she's gotten worse. And now she has no money. So she's also poor. She's lost her social status, probably. She can't rely on human help. She can't rely on the resources of other people. And now she can't rely on her own resources. Then there's another factor in this woman's problem, something that's not obvious to us as modern people. But ancient people, both Jews and non-Jews, would have seen this woman as ritually impure. Yesterday, the man that Jesus cast the demon out, the gospel said he had an unclean spirit or an impure spirit. And I explained yesterday that something or someone that is unclean in the Bible, by definition, that unclean person or thing can't come into contact with God. It can't come into contact with what's holy. So just like the man who had the demon was alienated from God by this unclean spirit, so this woman, she lives in a society and a culture that sees her constant bleeding as making her unclean. She's ritually impure. She can't come into contact with what's holy. So that means for her as a Jew, 3 times a year, all the people in her village go down to the temple in Jerusalem for the 3 feasts. And 3 times a year, she's left at home. She wants to have a relationship with God. She wants to go to the temple. She wants to participate in the sacrifices. She wants to celebrate the festivals that celebrate the redemption of Israel from slavery and God's covenant relationship with the Jewish people. But because she's ritually impure, she can't. And maybe even more in her own community, there might be people who avoid her because they know that she has this hemorrhage. They know that she's constantly bleeding, and they think she is ritually impure. I want to be ritually pure. I should avoid her. So the man yesterday, he was alienated. He was isolated. He was socially distanced. For how many years, we don't know. But this woman has been cut off from God and her community, not for like 1 year of COVID, but for 12 years. For 12 years, she's been in this hopeless situation, this isolated situation. And to make matters worse, and perhaps the worst thing, she can't have children. Both physically, because of her condition. Her condition would mean she can't have children. But then also because of the purity laws, if she's married, her husband can't be with her without making himself ritually impure. So this woman has all these sorts of problems. And you might think, well, maybe she should just stop being a Jew. She could join another religion. And then she could have relationship with God. Then she could have relationship with her society. But it's not just the Jews who thought this way. Really, all ancient people thought this way. So if she decided to join another religion, as soon as she comes to the temple of that religion, she's going to find out that people who have her condition can't come in. And there's going to be people who want to stay ritually pure who are going to try to avoid her. So in effect, this woman is alienated. She's isolated from God and from her community. It's almost as if she's dead. So what's the solution? We said that she's surrounded by a crowd, but she doesn't let the crowd stop her. Between her and Jesus is a crowd, and somehow she pushes through the crowd to get to him. She had heard about Jesus. The gospel said she'd heard report about him. So she's heard rumors, but she's not content with rumors. She needs to have contact with Jesus. So she reaches out and touches him. And how does she do that? She does it with faith. And this is what makes her so different than the crowd. If Jesus was in this huge crowd of people, such a big crowd that he's having trouble getting to where he's going, he must have been touching people all the time. If you've ever been on a crowded bus or a crowded subway, or perhaps in a crowded church, and you are jostling to get to the door, and you think just think to yourself, how many people do I touch on my way to the door? 10, 15, 20? That's the type of situation Jesus is in. But unlike all the other people in the crowd, she's not merely curious about Jesus. She's not just interested in Jesus. She's approaching him with faith. She's approaching him willing to take the risk that perhaps he is the person who can save her. In fact, he's the only person who can save her. Remember, she's learned the hard way. She can't rely on the resources of other people. She can't rely on her own resources. So she turns to God with faith and, in effect, asks God to take control of her life. She relies on Jesus' resources, not her own. Okay, so what does this mean for me? That this woman goes from this hemorrhage, this constant pain, this status of isolation, not being able to worship God with her people, to being healed, to being restored, to being made pure. The thing is, this woman has experienced more than healing. It's interesting. In the gospel, Jesus doesn't feel the grace enter the woman's body and then make a mental note to tell the apostles about it later so that they'll write it down, so that they'll record it. He stops and he makes the contrast between the woman and the crowd. And then he says to the woman when she comes forth, I'll repeat it. My daughter, your faith has restored you to health. Another way to translate that actually is your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be free from your complaint, or go in peace and be healed. She wanted to be healed, and she's gotten so much more than being healed. She got so much more than she asked for or she bargained for. She's brought into relationship with God, with Jesus. So that's the whole point of Jesus's conversation with the disciples, that the woman will confess what God has done for her. This way, the crowd sees the difference between their touching Jesus and this woman's touching Jesus. The people in the crowd see how to really approach Jesus with faith. She comes to Jesus as someone who wants her life changed, and she has it changed more than she could imagine. Because instead of being sent home free of her sickness, she's sent home as Jesus calls her daughter. You don't call somebody daughter unless you have a relationship with them. Jesus is restoring this woman to her relationship with God. And how does she respond? She responds by falling down before Jesus. In effect, she's worshiping him, and she confesses what he's done for her. That's why Jesus's words to her, "Go in peace and be healed," are so significant. Jesus is saying, "Be healed," after she's already been healed. And he's showing that her physical healing is just the beginning of her relationship with God. So I ask again, what does this mean for me? And I want to ask you 3 questions about this woman, about the man with the demon who we heard about yesterday, and what that could mean for your life. First, am I willing to reach out and touch Jesus? Do I want to be like the woman and reach out and touch? Or do I want to be in the crowd and sort of bump into Jesus and be content with bumping into him as if I was on a subway or in a crowded church, but never really have contact with him, never really have a relationship with him? The woman is no longer part of the crowd. She's not just curious about Jesus. She's not just sort of casually interested in him. She wants to meet the living God. She wants to rely wholly on Jesus. So that's a question for us to ask ourselves. Have I been in the crowd, or have I been reaching out? Have I been sort of content and curious about my relationship with Jesus, or have I yearned for something more? We can come to the Divine Liturgy, we can come to Vespers services and be in the crowd. I don't mean to say that there's nothing wrong with having lots of people in church. It's great. But if we come and we are basically content just to see, just to bump into Jesus, rather than to let him change our lives, then we're part of the crowd. How have we been part of the crowd? And how can our lives change so that we can be like the woman and reach out and touch Jesus, be with him, who is a living fire, so that his fire can set us on fire too? So the next question I want to ask, am I actually willing to let Jesus heal me? So it's no accident that both in the parables of Jesus and in the miracles, there are a different cast of characters each time. And in the parables, we're often supposed to identify with the so-called loser, the person in the parable who has the least relationship with God, the person who's cut off. So in the story of the prodigal son, the person we're supposed to identify with is the prodigal son. In the story of the publican and the Pharisee, it's great for us to think, okay, I shouldn't be proud like the Pharisee. But whose prayer do we regularly say when we come to communion? God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That's the prayer of the publican. We're supposed to identify with the publican. In the same way, in the stories of the miracles, we're called to identify with the person who's healed. And even if we have none of the sickness that they have, or none of the possession by demons that they have. Yesterday, when the man with the legion was healed, the man with the demons, the people from the city came out and asked, oddly, they asked Jesus to leave. They say, Jesus, please leave our neighborhood. They didn't want the man to be healed. What they wanted was their pigs back. Their pigs had all gone into the ocean, all gone into the sea. And that's what they really wanted, whether the pigs were clean or unclean, pure or impure. They didn't care. They don't care about the miracle. They don't care about the healing. They want their pigs. Today, the woman with this terrible impurity, nonetheless, comes to God and is willing to be healed. So what's the thing in my life that needs to be healed? What is the thing in my life that I rely on instead of God? And how is God breaking that thing down? So like this woman, I come to him. The woman is impure, and then she's made pure. And that should make us think about our own impurities, not of blood, but of our sins. Am I willing really to be cleaned of them? Because an encounter with God may not be that comfortable. You know, the woman was not terribly comfortable when Jesus said, "Who touched me?" She's afraid that she was going to be exposed. And she comes to Jesus, as the gospel says, frightened and trembling. Yet she still comes. She comes because she knows that his love for her is greater than her impurity. Do we want to be healed? You know, in a couple weeks, we're going to hear after Easter a gospel where Jesus heals a man who is paralyzed. And Jesus says to the man, "Do you want to be healed?" And it might sound to us like a silly question. But then when we think about those people from the city who were so concerned about their pigs, we think about all the people in the crowd who managed to touch Jesus without receiving any of his grace. Think to yourself, have I come to communion? Have I come to confession without really wanting to be healed? If I don't want to let God take control of my life and transform it and say to me, son or daughter, the way that he says to this woman, then I can't expect it to happen on my own. So then the last thing I want to ask, am I willing to get more than I bargained for? Am I willing to be surprised by how much the grace of God does in my life? So often we go to confession, and I really want to encourage you to go to confession in these last weeks of Lent, if you haven't already, to approach the Eucharist with your conscience cleared of your secret sins. But when you do that, do you go to confession just to alleviate your guilt? Or do you actually go to confession to be in relationship with God? Something new has happened. It's not just that the slate has been wiped clean. Certainly, yes, the slate has been wiped clean, but something more than that also happens, that you come out of confession as a son or daughter of God. to realize that our healing is not the end of the story, but actually the beginning. Just like this woman. That's why Jesus says to her, after he's healed her, go in peace and be healed. It's as if he's telling her to keep on being healed. Just like he often says to people that he's healed from some disease, he says, go and sin no more. He's saying, start your new life. Start your new life moving towards me. And if we reach out and touch Jesus with faith, if we're willing to let him heal us, heal the things that we're scared to bring out to the open, then we will get so much more than we could possibly hope for. Because we won't just be found not guilty, we'll actually be found to be sons and daughters of the King of Heaven. Amen.
Thank you very much, Father Deacon Cyril. That was a wonderful presentation. That is actually, I know I haven't been a priest very long, but that is actually one of my favorite gospel readings to read and to preach on, simply because of this demonstration of the faith of this woman. So thank you very much for elaborating on that. Looks like my daughter has another question again today. Are there any questions from the faithful here tonight? Or any comments or anything? I will come to you with the microphone. I did at the beginning of the service, probably that if you ask anything on the topic of the mission or anything on Lent, I don't suppose they could ask anything. So this question might be on anything.
Okay. Can you tell me your name, just so, because sadly I can't be with you guys.
Yeah. So this is Ray. He's asking a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you come closer, that might help. Thank you. And thank you, Ray.
So this is Greg, and his question is...
Oh, Greg.
Having studied theology and even other religions and everything like that, is everything with all other religions based on a higher power, a higher faith? Something along these lines. That's kind of, yeah.
Can you say the middle part? Is everything something, something, something? I missed that.
Is every faith or every religion more or less based on a higher power or a higher faith, something along those lines? Is that?
Sure, yeah. I think most are, but not all, actually. Muslims, the religion of Islam, and certainly Jews have a lot in common with Christians. We all believe in one God who created the world and who intervenes in the world somehow to reveal himself to us and to show us how to live. Now, then Christians would say more than the Jews or Muslims would do. We would say that God didn't just reveal himself through prophets, but he actually became a human being himself. And then he didn't just show us how to live, he also solved the problem of sin. Muslims and Jews have a sort of a lower sense, I think, of the problem of sin than Christians. Christians are very acutely aware of how sin alienates us from God. And then for the Eastern religions, Hinduism certainly has notions of a higher power. Buddhism generally is pretty quiet on the question. The Buddha said, if somebody shot me with an arrow, I wouldn't be worried who shot me. I would try to get the arrow out. So he's just concerned with how to live a good life, not with whether or not there's a God. I would say I would be concerned with who shot me with the arrow. I would try to make sure he didn't shoot me with another one. And then some of the other Eastern religions are somewhat similar. So yes, we hold this in common with many people throughout the world, a belief in a higher power. And what I think Christians hold especially is that the higher power we believe in is not some sort of cloud or some sort of force or some sort of essence, but actually is a person, that God is someone who we can have a relationship with. Now, obviously, there's in many ways that relationship is going to be like standing in a hurricane, but it's a relationship nonetheless, and that God calls us to that relationship, and then he does this wonderful thing by becoming a human. This is why Christmas is so much more than tinsel and Santa Claus. God becomes a human to reveal himself to us and then to reconcile us with himself. He builds a bridge back to us. So I hope, does that make sense, Greg?
We're getting a nod, yes.
Good. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Thoughts, concerns? Looks like we're good for tonight.
Good. Well, thank you so much, people.
I'd like to thank Father Deacon Cyril for again joining us this evening, taking time out of your schedule. I know it's, as I mentioned last night, this is not how we anticipate a parish mission, both on our end of receiving it, but also on his end of delivering it. So we do thank him for taking the time and coming to join us through these means here tonight.
It's a pleasure.
Excellent. We will continue again tomorrow online. That's our 10 o'clock liturgy, Divine Liturgy in Rossburn. Will be live streamed. And then again, we will take a short pause as we get things set up, where we will continue online with our part 3 of the mission. So I will elaborate a little bit more on that once we sign off here. So thank you very much, Father Deacon Cyril. And
thank you to all of you. Say a prayer for me.
You hope that when the borders open, we will be able to host you and your family here in person in the Rossburn district.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Peace.